thanks for joining us. I'm just waiting a few moments while a couple more people join, and then we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know, we're Detail Roofing and Sheet Metal, a service-based roofing company specializing in leak investigations, preventative maintenance, and localized repairs on all roof types. We service a large region of Southern Ontario and operate in the Lower Mainland of BC as Design Roofing as well. My name is Jessica Campbell. I'm an account manager with Detail Roofing, and I will be moderating today's session. I'm joined by Michelle Wallace, our business development manager, as well as Kelly McDonald, client engagement and events, who will be delivering today's presentation. Before we get started, I'll just go through a few housekeeping items. So this session is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube before the end of the week. This session is valid for 1 CPE credit and will be available for you to report through the CMRAO portal by tomorrow. For verification of your involvement today, the attendee report from Zoom will be sent to your CMRAO. Certificates will not be issued. You can use the Q&A feature to submit questions, and at any point, we will get back to as many as possible within the time allotted. Also, we will have a few polls popping up throughout the presentation and look forward to your participation. As a bonus, anyone who participates in the polls will be entered into a draw for a $10 Tim Hortons gift card. That will be one for each poll that we do. We will have draws for each of the polls that we're launching, and so stay tuned for them throughout. I'm just going to turn this over to Kelly now, who will do the presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. And as Jessica said, thank you so much for joining us today. Just want to quickly verify the mention there about the CMRAO and the credit. So just to clarify, after the session, we're going to download the attendee report from Zoom that has all of your information, including general license information that you submitted upon registration, and then send them the list just so they can verify. You will still need to go into the portal to report this learning activity. It will be available to report as of tomorrow. And just to reiterate, we are not issuing certificates and instead just provide the list to the CMRAO so that they can verify your attendance. So as you know, the title of the presentation today, Maximizing Your Roof and Preventing Leaks, a Case Study. When it comes to maximizing your roof and really getting the most out of it for the duration of its lifespan, that really comes down to completing preventative roof maintenance. So what we're going to be talking about specifically today, for starters, what is roof maintenance? What's the point? What does it involve? From there, we're going to quickly look at getting more bang for your buck by completing roof maintenance. We're going to take a look at some initial maintenance assessments through the years. So these are assessments that we completed, ranging from 1 year after a roof installation up to 20 years after the roof installation, just to see what some of the findings are at those various stages. And then, of course, the main part of the presentation, we are going to be looking at some maintenance case studies. So we have 4 separate corporations, all of which were experiencing a number of leak issues, just seeing what the history of these buildings were and how maintenance helped the issues that they were experiencing. At the end, we will be doing the Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to pose it into the chat, and we will get around to as many questions as possible at the end. Anything that we don't get around to, we will reach out to you directly just to make sure that your questions are adequately answered. So before diving in, I think Jessica is going to launch our first poll.
Are you currently completing preventative maintenance at your corporations? So I'll leave this up for a few moments for participation. Great, thank you to everyone participating. Slowing down a little bit now, so I'm going to end the poll. And okay. So we have 46% saying yes, 13% saying no, I am not no longer completing roof maintenance. No, I have never completed roof maintenance. We have 9%. And sometimes maintenance gets completed on a regular, but not on a regular schedule. We have 32%.
Yeah, so it is great to see that the majority of people are completing maintenance, at least in some form. So for those of you that aren't, or even if you are, hopefully throughout the presentation today, you'll be able to see what some of the benefits are and why it's important for the life of your roof system. So talking about what roof maintenance is, we're going to be looking at what the point is, what does it involve, and who says you should do it. As far as the point of roof maintenance, first and foremost, you want to be completing maintenance so that you can meet and hopefully even exceed the expected service life of your roof system. So depending on what type of roof system, roof membrane you have in place at your corporation, service lives can range from 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, but whatever the expected life is for that particular roof system, it is conditional on completing preventative maintenance over the course of the lifespan. Otherwise, it's just not going to last as long as it should. By completing maintenance, it's also going to identify any small issues before they become larger problems. Completing maintenance is also the best opportunity to prevent or reduce interior leaks. Throughout the presentation today, we're really going to dive into that aspect and see how maintenance has prevented some leak issues we've encountered. As far as what's involved, there's not just one set standard maintenance scope that's going to apply to all buildings and all roof types. It is going to be dependent on the specific roof and the specific building. So first and foremost, we would always recommend starting with an inspection of the roof system so that you can identify exactly what's going on. Through the inspection, what you're going to be identifying are any areas that are vulnerable, deteriorating, or damaged. Through the investigation of the roof surfaces and identifying any areas that do require attention, it's then also important to carry out any proactive repairs or critical items that may have been addressed in the assessment. So just looking at a few examples of what we mean by damaged, deteriorating, vulnerable. Damage is pretty straightforward, whether it's the roof membrane or various elements that are unable to serve their purpose due to harsh weather events, man-made causes, or installation errors. So very commonly, this could be damages to the actual membrane or shingles themselves. It could also be damage to the flashing at roof penetrations or the wall metal flashing or cap flashing, any areas that, again, are not able to serve their purpose due to damages. Some areas might not currently be damaged, but they're starting to show signs of deterioration. So this would be the breakdown of either the membrane or materials at various stages. And it's ideal to catch deterioration when it's in the early stages before it gets to the point that the material or the roof membrane is defunct and not serving its purpose. So something like caulking. The photo that we have up here, it's severely deteriorated to the point that it's split open. You want to address caulking before it gets to this point because often in this situation we see leaks occurring, whether it's at plumbing stacks, metal flashing, other areas like that. So once the caulking starts to get to the point that it's starting to deteriorate a little bit, starting to get brittle and weak, that is the point that you want to replace it before it gets split open like we have here. Another thing that we see often, whether it's with a 2-ply SBS modified bitumen membrane or with roof shingles, is over time, UV rays are going to break down the top layer of granules. If it's minor, there's small repairs that you can complete, but once it starts to become more major, that can start to cause problems and is really going to impact the overall lifespan of the system. So again, just addressing any deteriorating areas early before it's widespread. Now, as far as vulnerable areas go, oftentimes with vulnerable areas, it's roof elements that aren't currently damaged or deteriorated, but they're highly susceptible to cause issues like leaks if they're not addressed and maintained over time. So this may include, like some of the photos we have here, on an inverted roof system that's covered with the insulation and gravel ballast. If the gravel is displaced and the filter cloth is exposed, or if other roof elements are exposed, UV rays can again cause damage to these areas. So just making sure that everything is reseeded and redistributed so that you're not experiencing UV damage and the breakdown of the roof system. Also, any roof penetrations, whether or not they are visible when you're walking out onto the roof, these are very common leak issues. So we would consider that a vulnerable area that you just want to be paying attention to and trying to get ahead of any issues that could potentially cause leaks. Also, when it comes to the drainage system, just checking the drainage system, especially if there are situations like we have here where there's any sort of vegetation growth growing out of the drains that could leave them susceptible to blockages or issues with the roots of the vegetation penetrating the drain insert or penetrating the surrounding membrane.
I just have a common question, and I'll pose it maybe to Michelle, just to ask, what is the point, I guess, of getting your drains checked if there isn't visible signs of debris or vegetation like you see in the picture?
That's a great question. We get it all the time. One of the most important things in checking your drains is inspecting the drains to make sure that there's not anything wrong with the drains or like issues with the clamp or the waterproofing around it. It is really important to have a professional roofer check your drains every year beyond just for debris, just to make sure there's not any issues. We often catch issues in drains when we're cleaning them.
Great, thank you.
All right, so when it comes to roof maintenance, this isn't something that only we do or only we talk about. It is recommended by many people, some of which include manufacturers, roofing contractors, and engineers and building scientists. So just to pull a couple quotes from these different areas. So as far as manufacturers, this quote specifically comes from Suprema, an international roofing and building envelope manufacturer. And in their care and maintenance guide, they specify that a routine care and maintenance program is fundamental to the long-term performance of roofing or waterproofing. A lot of membrane manufacturers will also have stipulations in their warranties for the actual membrane warranty that maintenance or inspections are required in order to uphold the warranties. That's why it's very important to make sure that you are reading and understanding those. For Suprema, one of the warranties that I've seen from them for one of their particular waterproofing systems actually specifies that inspections and maintenance should be carried out twice a year. Other ones are only once a year. But again, a lot of these manufacturers do have stipulations within the warranty, meaning that if down the line there were any issues with the membrane and you were trying to go back to the manufacturer or the installing contractor was trying to go back to the manufacturer, if there wasn't proof of inspections and maintenance being completed, however many times it's stipulated in the warranty, then it would not be upheld. As far as roofing professionals, the Canadian Roofing Contractors Association in their bulletin on roofing preventative maintenance states that roofing professionals generally agree that a good roofing system requires proper design, quality materials, and quality installation to perform well. Following the installation of a new roof system, it is also critical to establish a preventative roof maintenance program in order to attain the expected service life of the roof components and system. And again, I briefly mentioned this at the beginning, but an important thing to take away from this is that not only is a maintenance plan critical, but it's not just to exceed the life, it's even to meet the expected service life of the roof system. And then finally, what engineers and building scientists say, this quote specifically is from an article written within Construction Canada talking about two-ply SBS systems, where they state that many SBS roofing systems, when expertly formulated, professionally installed, and properly maintained, can last 20 to 40 years. Catching the signs of aging early is critical in maximizing system life expectancy. Now, as far as this goes in regards to engineers and building scientists, this quote again specifically from Construction Canada, we've also come across a number of reports from local engineers and from local buildings that we work on, where within their assessment of the roof, they are personally recommending maintenance be implemented at a specific building to, again, attain or exceed the service life of the roof system. So questions that we get all the time are in regards to the maintenance schedule, including when you should start implementing a maintenance plan, how often you should be completing maintenance, and what time of year is ideal to be completing maintenance. So before we dive into the maintenance timeline, we're going to launch our second poll.
All right, so the next poll that we're doing, when should you begin completing inspections and implementing a maintenance plan after a new roof is installed? 1 year, 5, 7, 10, or 15? I'll leave that up for a sec and we'll see what you guys have to say. Okay, I'll leave it up for a few more moments. It looks like participation slowing down a bit. I'm going to end the poll now. Okay, so we have a lot of people saying 1 year, that's 61% of participants. We have 5 years, 29%, 7 years, we have 6%, 10 years, 4, and then 15. No one's saying 15 years.
That's great. Majority got the answer right.
Yeah.
Right. All right, yes, so as Jessica mentioned, a lot of people right on the nose there. It is recommended to begin completing inspections and routine maintenance 1 year after installation of a new roof. So that's whether it's a new build or a roof replacement. You want to be at least identifying any areas, again, where there is any damage, deterioration, or vulnerable areas that may require attention. As far as how often you should be completing maintenance and the maintenance cycles through the years. That is going to depend on the building. It could depend on how many roof areas there are, budgets for the particular corporation, but ideally you want to be completing inspections and maintenance at least once a year. As far as what may prevent you from doing it annually, or if you may need to be on a more regular schedule like biannually or quarterly, it could depend on things like the geographical location of the building, the age of the roof, the type of roof, the quality of the installation, and again, budgets for the corporation. As far as the time of year that maintenance should be completed, it can be completed at any time as long as you're working within manufacturer guidelines. So, there's times that we're completing maintenance throughout the winter. Again, as long as we're following the manufacturer guidelines and working within those, there's no issue with doing it outside of a time that you might think is a maintenance period. A lot of people do complete maintenance in spring or fall, either side of winter, because winter does tend to have the harshest conditions. Especially in more recent years, though, we haven't really been seeing the amount of snow accumulation or freezing temperatures that we normally do. So again, just making sure that you're monitoring the weather, working within manufacturer guidelines, you can carry out maintenance realistically at any time. Getting more bang for your buck. So by catching problems early before it gets to the point that they're widespread and causing various leak issues, it really helps to limit any reactive emergency spending that comes along with dealing and managing leaks. The earlier that you're able to implement a maintenance program, it's also easier just to budget over time for standard upkeep and kind of have an idea of what's coming up and what issues might arise. By completing regular maintenance as early as possible is also going to reduce the likelihood of having to plan for an unexpected roof replacement. We run into a lot of situations where we're doing maintenance on an older, aging roof system, and we identify that the roof is beyond its serviceable life, or it's at least nearing that point. And we have people say, well, the reserve fund study doesn't say that the roof should be replaced for another 5 years or 10 years. But that's not always the reality. So just having inspections completed, again, if you're able to do them annually and carry out maintenance annually, it's going to limit these surprise costs from coming up. And Michelle, something that we get asked very often, especially if we're talking about costs and budgets, is just how much people should be budgeting for roof maintenance. So if somebody were to ask you, what should I budget for roof maintenance? What would you say?
It's definitely going to vary on a lot of factors. The type of roofs you have, how you access the roofs, the number of roof areas. Kelly mentioned the types of foliage and stuff around the complex, the condition of how the installation is, all that sort of stuff. So the best way to get an estimate of a budget is scheduling a no-charge roof assessment, and we can always help anybody with that. And we can also plan with you, especially in buildings that are a little bit younger, and doing a multi-year budget for you to help you forecast in advance.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, so before we dive into our case studies, we're just going to take a look, a bit of a snapshot at what maintenance assessments might look like at various ages of a roof. So for starters, this is an example of an assessment that we did at a building that was 1 year old. You'll notice that the numbers at the bottom there are going up to 10. There weren't 10 maintenance items that we identified in the inspection. We had also identified some potential construction deficiencies to be brought back to the developer, but these items were more just proactive maintenance. So in year one, not a whole lot going on as far as maintenance requirements. This particular building had some areas where the gravel had been displaced and the filter fabric was exposed. So again, recommended to reseat that filter fabric, make sure that the insulation is in place and the gravel is evenly distributed so that UV rays aren't going to break down that filter fabric and then inevitably the membrane beneath it. Also, again, checking the drains just to make sure that they are clear and free from any defects or damages at the membrane or the drain insert itself. And then in this case, there was an EPDM membrane throughout, so we did have recommendations to seal and reinforce some of the seams in vulnerable areas. Looking at a building that was 2 years old, again, anytime we're doing maintenance, we're always going to have the recommendation to check and clean the drains. So we have that here as well. In this case, again, a few vulnerable areas like at wall penetrations where you have either the conduits or the vents are a bit exposed, leaving them susceptible to potential water infiltration. And then in this roof area, there was a 2-ply SBS roof system that was starting to experience some minor loss of granules throughout. So dealing with that by applying a liquid membrane and renewing the granules before it got to a point that it was widespread and really negatively impacting the overall roof system. So year 4 example, you can see here that there are some green roof areas on this particular building. However, this one over here, not one of them. So anytime we see vegetation growth, especially this, it's not extreme, but there is some vegetation growth. So just dealing with that before it becomes widespread or potentially the roots from the vegetation start to puncture or damage the membrane in any way. In this case, there were also some sealant renewal requirements like caulking at the vents and various seams, some rust starting to occur on the vents. So anytime we see any rusting on metal surfaces, we do recommend applying a coating just to help inhibit further rusting. In this case, the drains on the roof surface were blocked by gravel ballast. So not only checking the drains, but also installing custom fabricated gravel guards that are perforated metal. So it prevents the gravel from covering the drains entirely, but also allows water to get through and adequately drain from those surfaces. So now skipping ahead a few years, these are the first couple years after a roof is installed, but what happens if we go to 14 years? So in this particular case, as you can see, there's a lot of things that are happening here. Pretty much all areas of the roof surface outside of the metal roof areas were experiencing some pretty severe vegetation growth. Any areas where the membrane was visible, there were some damages occurring, really heavy rusting throughout at the units and the vents. At this point, it hadn't gotten to the point that it was corroded, but really nearing that point. They had some leaks occurring at the building, not ones that we had looked at before the assessment, but they did have some improper repairs in there, such as concrete at the base of this penetration, more vegetation growth occurring, as well as some vulnerable areas where sealant was deteriorated or there were exposed wall penetrations. So similarly, we have one where our initial maintenance assessment was 20 years after. Again, this one, tons of rust happening throughout. In this particular case, it had gotten to the point that it rusted to the point of corrosion. At that point, a coating isn't going to do anything. We would recommend having an HVAC technician come in, take a look at that, and potentially replace it. Other areas, again, there's rust occurring at these beams and at the gas lines, the sealant at the pitch pocket or gum pan at the base of these posts was severely deteriorated, and in this case leading to some leaks into the area below. Also have some vegetation growth throughout, and there had been some improper repairs, including a vent cap that was not properly sized, and then some of the flashing at the anchors was not the proper kind of flashing, and in a couple cases was leading to some leaks as well. All right, so again, those were just a few examples of some of the things that we've seen at various points. So now we're going to be taking a look at some specific case studies for 4 different corporations and leaks and maintenance that were happening there. But before we do, we have our third poll.
Hey, has the corporation you are currently managing ever experienced a leak? We have a few more participants, and then I will close the poll. Okay. Thank you for participating. Okay, so we have 77% of participants
Wow.
saying
That's bad.
21 no, 2% not sure.
Okay,
so-
wow. Not surprised about that at all.
All right, so looking at our first case here. So this case that we are going to look at, it is a 21 block townhouse complex that was built in 1973. Although the complex itself is a bit older, the roofs were relatively new, replaced within the last 10 years. On the 21 blocks, there were a number of different roof areas. So the upper roofs were all a 2-ply SBS flat roof. The garage roofs were a combination of the flat 2-ply SBS, or there were some sloped garage roofs as well that had specialty shingles installed. Some of the units did have cedar shingle mansards, or it would have vinyl siding. In the complex, there were 290 units. So just with some of those details in mind, the various roof areas, we just want to review a bit of the history here. So we first began working at this corporation in January 2022 when we were called out for an emergency leak situation. And from January 2022 up until April 3rd, 2024, we have investigated 37 different leak occurrences at this corporation. The first couple leaks that we looked at, there were a couple that were related to window issues that didn't have anything to do with the roof. So in those cases, we had recommended another contractor look into them. There were a couple cases where there were some condensation issues occurring as well. But since then, the majority of the leaks that we have looked at, some of the main issues have been related to heavy debris. It is an older complex with a lot of trees in the area. There are a lot of mature trees. So there is a lot of leaf debris throughout the complex that does cause blockages at the various drainage systems. The new roofs overall in fairly good condition. There's not widespread issues, but there are some installation defects that we've come across over the last couple of years that have been related to leaks. So just looking at some of the drainage blockages that we were talking about. On the upper flat roof surfaces, the types of drains that they have there are scupper drains. So you can see the outside of the scupper drain here would be connected to a downspout and then draining to the area below. These very often get blocked with debris, like we see in these pictures here. So when these blockages are occurring, water is ponding throughout the roof surfaces, and if there are any defects, then it has a better chance of finding a way into those defects when the water is ponded from the various blockages. Some of the issues that we've come across again with the installation, and this is something that we see very often with scupper drains, is the membrane roofing in the scupper, whether it's at the end here or just inside the opening at the side of the wall, starting to lift or just not adhering properly. So in these cases, as far as what type of repairs would be required, it would depend on the severity of it and the state of the actual scupper drain itself. In this case, it might be feasible to apply a liquid membrane to seal and reinforce that. In other cases, depending on the situation, replacement of the scupper drain or further membrane repairs might be required. So on the garage roofs, in the cases where it's the flat roof as opposed to the slope roof, those ones do have the flat roof drains in place for drainage system. And similarly, we see many instances where debris is blocking the drains, not allowing it to adequately drain, and then ponding throughout the roof surface, similar to the upper roofs. So in these cases, again, if there are any defects throughout, whether it's from membrane damages, deteriorated caulking getting in behind the metal, anything like that, can lead to leaks, in these cases leaking into the garage below. In this particular case that we have in the photos here, the metal was installed directly into the membrane. So that's just penetrating the membrane directly. So if this screw starts to become loose or rusted like it did in this case, and then again you have the water ponding, you can see the staining behind the membrane here, that was leading to a leak issue into the garage below. And then the final type of blockage that we see here is at the gutter system. So there were several cases where the debris was built up in the gutter system, blocking the downspouts and causing leaks either from overflowing from the gutters through the gutter seams or outlets, or in some cases it can be backing up on the other side of the gutter where it's attached to the side of the home. So in this case, they did have, or still do have, leaf guards or gutter guards installed. But even with those in place, there was still debris getting behind these areas and causing blockages. So I want to turn to Jess for a second, because I know you get asked all the time about gutter guards and their effectiveness and whether or not you would recommend them be installed. So what would you say to that?
For gutter guards or like leaf guards, it's really a case-by-case basis. There are some buildings, if you have a lot of overhanging trees and this is just a recurring issue where you're getting a lot of leaves in the gutters, it might be something to consider. But another factor is just the expense of A, having them installed. B is the maintenance required to remove and clean underneath them, because that is still going to be a requirement. I think sometimes there's a misconception that with like leaf guards rather, that there won't be maintenance required, or that it's a very easy install and then you don't have to worry about the hassle of gutter cleaning. that is not the case. It's still going to be a requirement to clean them once, maybe twice a year, and it's going to still require maintenance. Unfortunately, there's not really a magic solution where maintenance would no longer be required. So case by case basis, but there are definitely things to consider.
Okay, so with this site in particular, we were dealing with some leaks for a while and then did implement a maintenance plan. And especially given the fact that we had some history here, we had seen some repeat issues with the types of leaks that were occurring and the issues with the drainage. So the maintenance plan that was implemented here, big focus on eliminating blockages from these various roof systems and dealing with the excessive debris. So the first round of maintenance that we completed was in August 2023, where we did overall maintenance of the roof systems. So that would include the upper roofs and the lower garage roofs. And then also in November 2023, we completed a scope of work focusing on the gutters and the scuppers, clearing debris from these areas, especially given all the leaves falling this time of year in the fall season, making sure that those were clear heading into winter. So again, you can see some really heavy debris built up in the various roof system or the various roof surfaces. And then some of the other items that we addressed were, again, just preventative, proactive maintenance items, such as sealing the bases of the roof penetrations, especially in areas where you start to see a bit of a separation here, just to reinforce the area and try and prevent any leak occurrences. This case as well also had some minor granule loss throughout, so dealing with that before it becomes a widespread issue and the membrane is breaking down to the point that it's no longer effective. To try and get ahead of some of the scupper blockages that were occurring, we also drilled some overhaul holes into the scupper so that if they were becoming blocked, we wanted to get ahead of it backing up and flooding the roof surfaces by eliminating some of the water that was built up there. So since we completed the maintenance last year, and this is up until the end of March, beginning of April, there were only 2 leaks that we have addressed so far. I believe earlier this month we did have a couple of service calls where we were, I can't recall if there were leaks occurring, but we were going out to just do some service calls for clearing blocked areas at the various drainage systems. But again, a huge reduction in the amount of leaks that the corporation was experiencing here. So the second case that we're looking at, also a flat roof townhouse complex, a lot smaller in this case though, only 5 blocks versus 21 for the last one. In this case, on all roof surfaces, which included the upper roofs and then some lower side roofs, it was a flat 2-ply SBS roof system. This corporation had 113 units. And yes, this one a lot newer, roofs were a lot newer, building was a lot newer, built in 2017, and they had widespread construction deficiencies throughout, which eventually led to leaks. Unfortunately, though, these leaks didn't start occurring until just after the second year of the corporation. So just again, an overview of the history here. It was a rainy, wet time in January 2022, because again, that is when we started working at this complex. We were called out to deal with an emergency leak that was occurring. Before we got involved in this corporation, the management company was working with another contractor and trying to work with the developer as well, because again, they started experiencing leaks after the second year, and the manager told us that it was somewhere around 20 leaks that they were experiencing between that time. So it was a lot of similar issues that were contributing to the leak occurrences because of the construction defects. So again, when we began working here, the corporation and the roofs were 4 years old, heading into their 5th year. From the time that we first started working at the corporation in January 2022 up until April 2024, there have been 12 leaks that we've investigated. A lot of the leak issues that we have looked at, again, because of the deficiencies, have been similar issues occurring. So similar to what we were just looking at, also the membrane and the scupper drains. As I mentioned, this is something that we come across pretty often with scuppers, where the membrane is lifting or just not adequately bonded to the scupper drain there. So that was happening in this case. We had some issues with some open seams and lifting seams throughout the field membrane. In not many cases, but there were a couple where there were fasteners in the membrane that were coming out of the membrane and just allowing water to get into those areas. Some issues with other penetrations and water getting into those areas as well. So very shortly after we began working at this corporation and dealing with some of the leaks that were happening there, we were awarded a scope of work that addressed localized repairs at 11 units. So the scope of work was determined by another contractor. We carried out the repairs, and the repairs included scupper replacements and the surrounding membrane, replacement of the metal flashing at the bases of penetrations, whether they were plumbing stacks, vents, what have you, and new membrane installation, both for around these areas where the penetrations were being roofed in, and just localized membrane repairs. So even though we had completed widespread repairs at these 11 units, there were leaks that were continuing after these were done at units outside of the 11 that we had completed repairs on. So at that point, we did initiate a maintenance plan, really focusing on what some of those main deficiencies were and trying to get ahead of any leak issues. This is something that we did complete in phases. So we completed the first phase of maintenance in January 2023, trying to get the most critical items, and then completed a second reduced scope of work in May 2023. So from May to December 2023, there was only one leak reported. We have started to see a few more at the beginning of 2024. So again, up until the end of March, there were 2 leaks reported, and the annual maintenance recommendations there are pending. We just recently went out and did the assessment. As far as the items that we identified last year and this year, there is a lot of overlap in the recommendations that are being completed, because as you can see from the photos that we've looked at so far, there's a lot of roof penetrations, there's a lot of scuppers, there's a lot of membrane defects, including a lot of things at the gravel stop here around the edge of the building. Membrane is starting to lift in areas there, lifting at seams, whether it's along the corner of the roof here or in the field membrane, we're seeing some lifted seams. So again, we've just been completing these in phases, beginning with the most critical options. And Michelle, I know you're asked this often, but why might you complete things in phases as opposed to just doing everything all at once?
The main reason is budgetary. Is if you were to reseal all of these penetrations and all of these scuppers at once, it would be incredibly expensive. So if you spread it out over a few years and you do it in phases, starting with the most critical areas, then it helps save the budget, and as well as it allows you to each year be checking all of the roof areas to see if there's any additional areas that you haven't noticed or been brought to your attention.
That's a good point too about through maintenance being able to access all the roof areas, because especially in the case of townhomes, whether it's one like this that has 5 blocks or even one like before that has 21 blocks, it's very time consuming to get up on each block. So for the initial maintenance assessment, for us personally, we would not do a complimentary assessment of all blocks. I'm not sure that you could find anyone that would, especially something like 21 blocks. So by completing the maintenance, you're able to get up on each and every block, each and every roof area every year to identify any issues that might be happening throughout. I apologize, my screen is a little frozen here. Okay, so before moving on to the next one, just looking at some of the issues that we had identified and the maintenance that we had carried out. So again, this was from last year. A lot of the recommendations for this year, very similar, just continuing these items throughout the various roof areas. So it did include a lot of liquid membrane and granule application just to seal and reinforce any loose membrane seams, whether that was in the field or stripping. Areas around the scuppers, especially, we had seen a lot of leaks from those areas, sealing the bases of any roof penetrations, as those were vulnerable areas and had contributed to some roof leaks, as well as liquid membrane application at the membrane along the gravel stops where that was starting to lift in areas as well. All right, so the third one here, and I apologize, I know that these ones are very townhome heavy. Our last one is not a townhome, but in general, when it comes to leaks, especially a lot of leak occurrences, we tend to see more leaks occurring at townhome complexes versus towers. And realistically, it's just because there's a lot more roof areas there. The roof areas are usually directly above units, whereas on a tower, it might not be affecting a unit. Also, we typically have different deck types in each of them. With a concrete deck on a tower, it could take a lot longer for water to appear inside of a unit versus a townhome. So we do tend to see a lot more leak occurrences with townhomes, whether it's a flat roof or a sloped roof. With this case here, it was a 10-block townhome complex built in 2014, 2-ply SVS roofs throughout. So that included the upper roof surfaces that we see here, the common roofs. There was also 2-ply SVS in the gutter system, as well as the private terraces at each of the units. So it's 174 units overall. Key thing here is that this corporation, the terrace roof areas at the units are the owner's responsibility, whereas the upper roofs and the common roof is the corporation's responsibility. So in this case, we actually started out here as opposed to the other ones where we were doing various leaks and dealing with various leak issues and then implemented a maintenance program. In this case, we first came out for an initial maintenance assessment and then have been doing maintenance and leak management over the years. So from 2017 to 2023, we have completed 5 preventative maintenance scopes, but again, because of the fact that the corporation is only responsible for the upper roofs and the common roof, not the terraces are not included in the annual maintenance that we complete. Overall, from 2017 to March 2024, we have investigated 53 leak occurrences at this particular corporation. And now we're going to take a look at some of the findings that we saw in the initial maintenance assessment in 2017, as well as some of the common leak occurrences that happen here. So our first maintenance assessment in 2017, when the building and the roofs were 3 years old, there was a combination of standard maintenance items. Again, there were some heavy foliage because of trees in the area, which impacted some of the roof areas more so than others. But we also did identify a lot of critical construction deficiencies, which weren't identified in the period where the builder could take care of those. So some of the issues that we identified as far as construction defects included the membrane, especially in areas like this where it was the stripping going up the side of the building here. The stripping was opening like it is here, or seams were lifting. There were some areas where details were just overlooked. So in this case, the insulation was just visible and exposed. What we did there was installed metal to cover any areas where this was and kind of put a corner flashing on there. The common roof especially had a lot of ridging, wrinkling membrane happening throughout. If there's not any openings in the membrane, it's not the end of the world. It's not an immediate thing, but it can cause issues over time. In this particular case, there was ridging, and then there was also opening at the seams. Sometimes you might see it referred to as a fish mouth, and that's just because where it's open on the seam there, it's just a little opening. It's kind of resembling a fish's mouth. Other things, just standard preventative maintenance items, again, such as sealing the bases of penetrations, especially in these cases where it's starting to show some open exposed areas, and applying caulking, other sealants wherever that might be required. So as far as the membrane issues, especially, and the seams that we're opening, this is something that we continue to come across. So these particular photos here of open seams that we're encountering, these are photos specifically from years 6 to 8. So it's not something, there are some cases where we're completing things in phases, but there's also some things that are going to take more time to pop up. So the open seams is something that has contributed to a number of leak issues at this corporation. It's something that if there's a leak occurring, we would go out and investigate and do any subsequent repairs, but it's also something that through the annual maintenance, if we identify any of these areas, sealing any open seams is always included in the scope of work. So another issue specifically on the upper roofs that has contributed to some leak issues, mostly in 2021, there were a series of leaks that were occurring all on the same block, and they were all related to the same thing, which was the tall cone flashing at the vent penetrations. So when we had investigated a few of these issues, we are finding the same thing. And what that was the flashing and the ducting was rusting from the inside and leading to severe corrosion in some cases. There were one or two, not many, where you could see some signs of rusting from the outside, but for the most part, it was inside the vents where this rust and corrosion was occurring. And really it all boils down to the quality of the materials from the initial installation. Ultimately, the vents on this entire block had to be replaced 7 years into the life of the corporation. The other ones are being monitored throughout other blocks just to see the state and if replacements are going to be required for those as well. Now the terraces, the majority of the leaks that we have encountered here, especially over the last couple of years, have been traced to the terrace roof surfaces or building envelope. So a lot of the issues that we're coming across on the terrace, some of them are related to the post penetrations for the railings between the units, whether those areas are unsealed or the bolts are starting to lift, areas are starting to open, water's getting in there. We've seen many issues with the doorway. In those cases, depending on the issue, it might be something where we can apply a sealant. In other case, we might recommend door specialists to look into it and confirm what might be required. There have been issues with deteriorated or missing caulking, water getting in below. In cases where there's no waterproofing underlayment, then it just seeps into the plywood below. And then in this case, again, similar to that one that we saw with the garage flat roof, the fastener was just penetrating directly into the waterproofing and into the area below, allowing water to get in. So when that waterproofing was removed, the area below completely saturated. The terraces here also have skylights, so we've seen some issues from skylights. All of them do have a protection board on top of the membrane. We have encountered a couple issues with the membrane as well, but again, it is ultimately the owner's responsibility to pay for any repairs that are happening at these units. So oftentimes they're just enlisting their own contractor, and sometimes we're not seeing the greatest quality of repairs, which can lead to additional leak issues if it's not being done properly. So the final case that we're going to look at, it is a tower. So this is a high-rise tower that was built in 1959. Unsure of the age of the roof here, but it is a tar and gravel roof throughout the main upper roof areas. And then the lower garden terraces had a 2-ply SBS roof. By the time we started working here, this wasn't a condominium, but it was high-rise tower. The roof was already beyond its serviceable life when we first started working here. So just overview of the history. We completed an initial complimentary assessment here in June 2015. We had many critical findings, of which we'll look at some of those on the next slide. We didn't actually begin completing work until 2018. At that point, they were experiencing some really severe leak issues. As you can see from this photo here, which is from that building, the leaks had been happening for quite a while and causing some pretty significant interior damages. So we were addressing some of the leaks. However, the membrane was beyond its serviceable life. It wasn't nearing it. It was done. So in the initial assessment, some of the things that we identified included issues with the actual membrane, deterioration and damage that left the area susceptible to water ingress, as well as really heavily deteriorated sealant throughout, including caulking at the metal flashing seams, at the stacks. There were some open penetrations at the railings, plumbing stack penetrations throughout, areas that were in very poor condition that we highlighted. However, they just didn't have the budget at that time to be looking at implementing a maintenance program or replacing the roofs. So the leaks here, as I mentioned, with towers, it's not often that we're seeing, even on older roof systems, 20, 30, 40 leak occurrences in a shorter period of time. However, there were some pretty major leaks happening here. Overall, we addressed 9 leak situations between 2018 to 2020, majority of which would happen in 2019. In a lot of these cases, it did have to do with the state of the membrane and just the breakdown of the membrane due to its age. So again, they did not have the budget to replace the roofs. So until they were able to get to that point, we did work with them to implement a critical maintenance plan. The critical maintenance plan was implemented in 2021, and we did determine a multi-year program just to help them budget for multiple years. So we had a maintenance program implemented from 2021 to 2023. And at this point, it wasn't really about trying to prevent the leaks. It was just dealing with the leaks as they happened. So it was critical maintenance for leak management. Some of the items that we addressed, if there were any issues with the membrane, rather than doing a large repair, we would just do kind of reinforced temporary repairs, again, just for budget purposes, and try and mitigate any water ingress from the membrane, as well as sealing any bases of penetrations, renewing caulking where it was severely deteriorated. And again, even in this case, looking at the drains and removing any debris so that there weren't any blockages that could make the roof area more susceptible to leak issues from ponding water. So once we did the maintenance in 2021, there weren't any further leaks reported throughout 2021. In 2022, there was 1 leak reported. Following that, again, not a corporation in this case, so the building was actually sold. When it was sold, they had an in-house team that dealt with any of their maintenance requirements. So it's not a building that we work at any longer. However, in the time that we were there working on it, we were able to at least manage the leaks that they were experiencing and find a situation that was going to work for them and for their budget.
Okay, great.
So yeah.
As we're just going to launch our final poll right now. I did drop a message in the chat, but if you guys have any questions that have come up for you throughout the presentation, we're nearing the end and we'll do a question answer period shortly. So you can add those and I will launch the 4th poll. Is there a point to completing maintenance if your building or complex isn't experiencing any leaks? I'll leave this up for a moment longer. See a bunch of responses trickling in. And I'm going to end the poll now. Okay, I will share the results. We have 94% saying yes, 4% no, 2% maybe.
That's great. I think one of the major things to keep in mind is it's not necessarily the leaks that you see that are the major concerns. It's really the leaks that you don't see that are the biggest concern for the building's structural integrity, and for any long-term issues in the building. So that's definitely one of the tackles, reduce those small trickle leaks that you don't see necessarily right away till you open up an area and you find rotted wood or long-term, rebar issues, that sort of stuff down the building. And then, as Kelly mentioned earlier in the presentation with the quotes from the other experts, is maintenance is, yes, it does help extend the life of your roof, and there's lots of things that you can do to do that. But if without completing regular maintenance early on in your roof's life, you're not even going to be able to meet the expectation that you have set out for your roof. So it's definitely a very important thing to implement early on in the building's life.
Mhm. I'll just quickly mention that there are some elements of the roof system. If the life expectancy, say, is 10 years, it might only have, like, caulking, for instance, is something that should be renewed more frequently. So it's similar to like getting a filter changed on your car. You're going to want to get that topped up and touched up.
Yeah, so just further to that, and Michelle had mentioned, there could be an area where you lift it up and then you see that there is water underneath. And we have encountered this a number of times in the photos that we have here. We had done an inspection of these flat roof areas that the building had on most of the units, and recommended that 16 of them be replaced with a new 2-ply SPS membrane. When we were doing these, it really was a more proactive thing. There were some small issues, but just to get ahead of them, we recommended replacing the membrane. Corporation ended up going ahead with the 16 that we recommended. And when we were removing the existing membrane, at most of them, it came back with really saturated, deteriorated plywood beneath. And in these cases, it hadn't yet become a leak into the interior space below. However, it's very likely that if this was left and they didn't replace these roofs, it would have eventually caused a leak to the interior. The thing with performing any maintenance is that on top of the benefits that we previously mentioned, it's going to provide the best chance to prevent leaks from happening. There's no way to eliminate leaks. You're not going to catch every single one of them by completing maintenance, but again, it's just going to provide the best chance, especially if you're not doing anything or any sort of maintenance on the roof. As far as how many leaks it prevents, there's no quantifiable way to say, if you're completing roof maintenance, you are going to eliminate or prevent X amount of leaks. However, again, it's just going to provide the best opportunity to get ahead of it and keep your roof in peak condition. And then final slide here before we dive into the Q&A. Again, many times when we're completing maintenance, so that was an example of kind of a proactive inspection that we had done. In this case, during a maintenance, a scope of work, we were inspecting the base of a penetration and found some deteriorated and damaged areas. So we replaced the flashing at the base of this anchor. And when we had removed the existing flashing to complete the repairs, there was some buildup of water beneath the hardware and beneath the membrane there, which again, hadn't yet resulted in a leak in the building, but had potential to do so over time if this inspection wasn't completed and if this replacement of the hardware wasn't completed. All right,
Okay.
so with that, we will dive into our Q&A. I apologize, we're towards the end of the hour here, but we'll see if we can get around to a couple before wrapping up for the day.
Yeah, thank you guys. So the first question I have from one of you, the best way to adjust high roof drains, roof completed incorrectly and no performance audit completed, budget will be costly. So basically, if the roof drain is sitting too high, what's the best way to adjust that?
There's a few different things you can do. It's going to depend on where the drains are and what type of drains they are. Sometimes if they're bi-level drains, you can drill additional holes into the drains, and to allow some more water flow into it. It's just going to depend, but we can definitely take a look at it and see what it is in that situation.
Awesome. Okay. Please weigh in on roof integrity when the owner considers rooftop gardens.
Yes. So I guess, Gabby, what you're asking is the challenges that rooftop gardens pose. And there's quite a few. One of the major things is that you want to make sure that when you're installing a rooftop garden, A, that your membrane system is in great condition. And then B, think about the possibility of needing to access that membrane system. So when you're installing something, you're going to remember that at some point you may need to move those items that you put on. So the type of equipment that's put on and the decking and everything like that. You also want to protect it properly. So if you're putting a planter down, for an example, making sure that it's not put directly on the membrane, making sure that it's protected the roof membrane, and then also rooftop gardens can increase vegetation a bit on the roof area with the seeds and stuff dropping down. So making sure that you're getting regular inspections on maintenance for the vegetation and just being careful on that front. And then also with the protection of the membrane and foot traffic, you want to make sure it's properly protected, because the more traffic on your roof, the more wear and tear on your roof, the more requirements for maintenance in the area.
I think for the sake of time, if we can have one more question, Jessica.
Yeah. Hello. On a PVC roof system, single ply, we have seen the material lifting up with high winds. The winds push over the upper roof, creating lifting of the membrane. The membrane is completely intact, no damage, but it likely was never mechanically fastened. So it lifts with the suction force of the wind, blowing up over the building roof, 14 floors high. No damage ever caused, but it looks odd to see the material lifting upwards during wind events. Any thoughts?
Not good. That's very dangerous, because all you're going to take is a greater high wind and it's just going to rip your roof off one day. So I would definitely get that refastened properly throughout. We can help with that as well, and we can be in contact. But while it is fastened maybe on the exterior and it hasn't quite caught it, we've had many situations where we've had roofs blown off. And the last thing you want to do is deal with your roof blowing off in the middle of a massive windstorm. And it's very dangerous and very difficult to deal with.
Okay, as we conclude, I just want to quickly mention, Michelle did mention this earlier, but we do complimentary roof assessments. So for those who answered questions, you might benefit from a roof assessment, and we can come take a look. Or for other people sitting at your desk right now, if that sounds like something that could benefit you, you can just let us know and we can be in touch.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be running a contest, so anybody that submits a no-charge roof assessment by Friday of this week, then you can enter a chance to win a gift card. So definitely, if anybody has with all this rain, then you definitely contact us and we can help you out with that as well.
So thank you everybody for joining us. Later today, I will be sending out an email just reiterating everything that we mentioned from the beginning about the CMRAO and the CPE credit, and just how to report that if you haven't done so yet, as well as a recording of the webinar. And then if you do have any additional questions or are interested in a roof assessment, then please feel free to contact us, and I will include any details about that in there as well.
Thank you.
Bye.